Hello, and welcome to part 5 of the Speed Duel Battle City Box review. Why am I in my Dan Green Yugi Pharaoh voice? Because we are starting today with the greatest deck ever invented in the history of speed duels. Ladies and gentlemen, PASSMAM. What is PASSMAM? Some of you may know PACMAN. Pure advantage cabals munch all news. However, that is something for a time long gone. Today we have PASSMAM. Passive aggressive, swarming scarabs, murder all monsters. Let us get right into the deck, shall we? Hey guys, it's V, it's Terramaster. I don't know who that guy was, took over my video for a minute there. I'm back
Crazy.
with Cursive. What?
I said crazy.
Yeah, I know. Must have been my spirit inside my Millennium Puzzle. Anyway, I'm back with Cursive here today, who's here not for this full video, but only for this special deck because he worked on it together with me to create it, and it probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for him one day while we were testing Battle City Box decks, just saying, hey man, I want to test PACMAN. And so we went from using a lot of camels to not using any camels. Anyway, here's the replay. So I'm gonna set up speed duels. I didn't take my 4,000. I did take my 4,000. See, I'm smart. Okay.
Good job.
Yep. All right. So you see, you did open one of your swarms. Now it's not the better one, but it's fine. It doesn't matter because you do have 3 whole protections for it.
Exactly. And that's what you need, right? Protection for these set monsters. Like, this is honestly an ideal opening hand. Just protection and a set. Beautiful.
Yep. Phenomenal. Yep. And other than Jinzo, which they literally would have to know what you're doing, conflict Jinzo on the first turn, and even then, if you don't want to get hit, you don't have to, right?
Exactly.
Anything else, you can just floodgate right away. And I understand here where you might not want to floodgate, because if you knew what you were going to draw a Parasite, yeah, you would. But think of it as if you have the opportunity to use floodgate, so if they're not doing a skill summon or summoning Jinzo, my thought is to just do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But then you do draw Parasite, so cool. So now you can pop a back row, right? And then you can just flip your swarm back face down. Or, and you can take this, you don't have to.
So the alternative option to, because as you can see here, Terramaster for protection, assuming worst case scenario, they summon a Jinzo off of their floodgated monster, right? He protected using a Gentle Mander, but if you did leave your swarm face up, you could have actually protected using Parasite Paranoid, as they can't attack insects with Parasite equipped. And what's your swarm? It's an insect.
Yep. That is truly, truly disgusting, because then when it's your turn again, you draw a Book of Moon, nice, and then you reveal your skill. That's right. We're playing PASSMAM with Moth.
Here we go. The legend himself.
Yep. And then you can activate half of Greed, which as you draw a card. And you choose
Beautiful.
Zombina.
Fantastic draw.
Yep. So just like that, it's potentially lethal with 2 protections. Why the hell does this card not have a Dark Paladin card back? What are you doing?
I do not know.
What kind of glitch is that? Oh, well, you've seen it here first, folks. Dueling Book glitching the card back. Whatever. Alright, well, I'm going to just ignore that and just go back to how cool this deck is. So yeah, that perfectly showed off the deck in that you have the skill that pluses 2, and you have your swarms. Now, this was considered a quote-unquote bad hand because you drew the worst swarm. Now, Scarabs would have been even better, obviously. But, yeah, but this is still, like, as you can see, like, disgustingly good. So, and this isn't even the whole deck. So let's just show you the full deck.
Alright guys, so before we get into the actual topic of discussion here being the deck, I got a little story for you guys. So, me and Terramaster had this built with originally Twisted Personality, because that's the first thing that goes through your head. But one day we're just chilling. Terramaster started putting things like Gokipon to help search out his swarms and stuff. And he was like, man, if only there was an insect hand trap to search. And at that moment, I had to call Terramaster. We could no longer talk through typing. I had to phone him and say, Terramaster, is there actually an insect hand trap in the game? To which Terramaster replied, Parasite Paranoid? And thus it was born!
That's right, boys. Pure advantage insects, even though that's not what we called it because that doesn't sound cool at all. We said passive, I'm gonna remind you of this, passive aggressive swarming scarabs murder all monsters. All right.
Amen.
Amen indeed, brother. Okay, let's get into the deck here. So you've got your Parasite and your Swarms, so only one copy of Locust because popping back row is less important in a deck where you're the control deck, right? So we went with opting to focus a lot more on the monster popping, thus it's called Swarming Scarabs. And you have your Flipper Face Downers to stall, and you have your Lock to lock their monster and start burning them.
Yep.
So an alternate win con there, in addition to your potential OTK, which always happens with Parasite and Moth. Now what's cool here is you only have to run one Moth. Tell them why.
Alright, boys. Alright. And maybe girls, who knows. One Moth is all that is needed. First off, Moth is never a brick, because if you draw that plus Parasite, that is fantastic. Because Parasite doesn't only give you access to your Moth, but it also gives you access to all your Swarms.
Yep.
That's right. You have your 3 Scarabs and your 1 Locust, which is another reason why Locust is not necessary at more than 1, because you technically run 4.
Yeah. And you technically run 6 Scarabs. Disgusting.
Exactly.
Disgusting. So it's not the old Moth deck where you're purely dependent on just summoning a big beat stick and attacking with it. You have the option to go into a slower control game and still get your +2 off the Cocoon. It's not even fair.
Yeah, and then like most decks run into the scenario where they recycle back their 3rd Parasite just for the extra draw. But in this deck, the 3 Parasites that are sitting in your deck after the combo are not dead cards. They are hand traps. They are protection for your Swarms.
Yep. So like you saw in the replay, like Curse mentioned, if you were to leave your Swarms face up, as long as you have a Parasite in your hand, you can go ahead and use that on an opponent's monster so that they can no longer attack your Swarms, which is something broken in and of itself. So, yeah. So a lot of protection. Gentlemander is also protection. Zombina can also recycle any Swarm or Gentlemander to help you create a lock. So like, just a lot of stuff that it's the purest definition of a control deck there can possibly be, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. You slowly choke out your opponent's resources by flipping your Swarms, and then when you go for your big play if you need to, it's the most versatile deck I think I've seen in Speed Duels, where it does everything and anything you want it to do at any given turn.
Yeah, burn, control, OTK, it's beautiful.
It is absolutely beautiful. And speaking of burn, that's the first thing I'm going to point out on the side deck here. If you do decide that, if they're playing Spellproof Armor, say, or something else that just Moth doesn't work well against for whatever reason, not Moth, Cocoon, sorry, it's not just Moth.
Yep.
You can side into Twisted Personality and just go the control, burn, take a resource out of their hand every 2 turns route, if that's what you want to do. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the deck, because it isn't inherently a burn deck, and you want to control your opponent's resources, so if you run into an opposing burn deck, you can have some issues. But if you also run Twisted Personality, well then every time they get a counter, you get a counter, and you can fight back, and you should technically plus more than them, because alongside your TP, you have access to, all your Swarms.
Yep, exactly. And that's a good way to say why we're citing the second Locust is against a burn deck that relies on their back row, any deck that relies a lot on their back row. Then you can just go ahead and side in the second Locust if you feel like you need it. Obviously, if you were to side into Twisted Personality, again, you would probably want to side out the Moth. Not probably, definitely, because it's just a one big fat brick.
Yes.
And then Parasite, maybe, depending on how much you need it as a hand trap.
Yeah. So if it's against Spellproof, Parasite has to go.
Yeah.
And that's why Sphere Karibo is great in the side. But against other matchups, you actually do not need to cut the Parasite.
No, you don't. Exactly. Yeah. So again, specifically for Spellproof, you can also put in more traps. You can put in Mind Crush, because if they Spellproofs are not playing Soul Exchange, so if they activate their Soul Exchange, you can Mind Crush and call, you know, whatever you think they have, Jinzo Spell Canceller. If they Summoner's Art to search their Clausolis, you can get rid of that. Spellproof, you can also play traps to just protect your swarms, which is Negate Attack and Waboku. Or some people like to pronounce it Waboku, but that's wrong. You can play Draining Shield to negate an attack and also gain a bunch of life points, and then just go on controlling. Speaking of gaining life points, Golden Ladybug, right?
Yep.
And then if you want to search these insects, you have your Danipon and Gokipon, which is part of the story time we just went through.
Yep.
And your nice little giant rat floats into either Zombina or one of these insects. So giant rat was actually something we were playing in the pre-Parasite version of the deck.
Yep.
So we were doing that at some point. So if that's the direction that you want to take your PASSMAM deck, do not call it PACMAN. Because there are no camels here. You see that? There's a lot of stuff, but there are no camels. 0 camels.
Exactly.
Camels are banned. All right.
Banned.
All right. Lost Wind is just so the deck does have trouble with XYZ Dragon Cannon, since it's a skill summon, so it's so stupid and can't get floodgated. So Lost Wind is important. But
I will say though,
Yep.
I played a matchup against Terramaster where he played XYZ, and I had a Parasite in my hand, and he committed all of his resources to wiping my board, and then on the following turn I just Parasited him and won. So
yeah, no, so it's not that bad, because they have to fusion if they want to effect pop your cards.
Yep.
And if they don't fusion, then you win anyway, because you get to use your full control strategy. And if they do fusion, as long as you have Parasite, you win. So if you're worried about XYZ Dragon Cannon, maybe this is the deck you should play.
yeah, and if they don't target your Scarabs right away and they target a back row, like Book for example, and you can just book them and then Parasite and then Scarab them on the following turn. So they should probably aim for your monsters, but if they don't, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not playing a big brain player who knows the meta, then
or they do think I gotta aim for that monster in case it's a Scarab, and surprise, it's a Zombina, and I'm still gonna activate Book and then get a Scarab.
Hold on a minute. Read this Parasite really quick. Also, its effects that activate by targeting an insect monster you control are negated. Does that mean what I think it means? Does that mean...
So if Scarab or Swarm or Locust is face up, they cannot target with their XYZ.
That might actually be the play then, right? You
just chain and then resolves backwards, and Parasite negates the effect when it tries to resolve.
That's so good. Oh my god, that is so broken. So then you've completely paralyzed the XYZ Dragon Cannon, because not only can it not use this effect to target your swarm, it can't attack it either because it's an insect.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, guys, these swarm cards actually made Parasite better, believe it or not. So
yeah.
And it actually made Parasite a fun card, because unlike Brain Dead Moth, which is what you call it, this is actually a really, really fun deck to play. So there's any deck throughout this whole video series that I'm going to sit here and tell you, like, play this deck, try this deck out. It's a lot of fun. It's this deck. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it for this deck. And that's actually all for Cursive in this video. But we'll have a new special guest coming in for the next deck, which is actually an upgrade to Viral Infection. And it's actually going to be a guest who's never been on the channel before. So that's something to look forward to. Anyway, Cursive, thank you so much for being here. And I guess...
Thanks for having me, man.
Yep.
It was actually so much fun. So glad I was here for this.
Yeah. You had to be. I mean, there's nobody else I could have except like the co-creator of the greatest deck of all time. All right, guys. I guess Cursive out.
Signing out.
All right, so here is the next card we're going to talk about, and joining me as promised is a first-time guest on the channel, and that is Justice from Team JDG, the founder of Team JDG, that is. Hey, Justice.
Hey, Dharmaster, how you doing?
Hey, good. I have never said this publicly on a video, so I guess this is the perfect time to do it. I am a member of Team JDG and have been for a little bit now. So probably look for more stuff involving Team JDG, hint hint. since Cursive, who was just here, is also on the team. So,
Yeah.
as is Lucas, who's going to be here later. What were you
Yes,
saying?
yeah. I've been working hard to expand the influence of Judgment Gaming, and yeah, getting you guys on there was awesome, and it's been great working with you guys through there. So happy to be here.
Yep. And this is going to be a full Judgment Gaming video because it's me and everybody else who's on this video is on the team as well. So cool. That's something fun. Anyway, Night Assailant. So this card is limited in the TCG. And there's a reason for that, because if you are to read it, the flip target when monster your opponent controls destroy that target is a reprint of Maneater Bug and Old Vindictive Edition, so nothing special there. But it's the second effect that makes it Forbidden and Limited List worthy, is that when it's sent from your hand to the graveyard, you target one flip effect monster except this card. Now see how it says except this card and not except Night Assailant? You return that card to your hand, so that means that if you have another Night Assailant in your graveyard, it constantly loops. Now, we don't have a lot of discard cards in Speed Duels right now, but we do have a couple of ways this could be abused.
Yeah, so the first one that I think is one of the most obvious, and that it is one of the most, I think, popular or most talked about decks right now is the Union deck, the XYZ. All of those fusions discard cards. And when you can just keep discarding cards every turn without actually losing card advantage, that's pretty good.
Yeah, especially considering none of those fusions are limited to once per turn, so it's unlimited use of all those effects because you have unlimited cost to pay.
Yeah, when I can just go, I have XYZ and I blow up your board, pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you consider that it's guaranteed you'll get the first one off because of the skill protection. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty absurd combo. And I think we can point out that at the time of recording, XYZ has won 2 tournaments already, has gotten first place recently. And both of those decks did run Night Assailant with their XYZ fusions. So it has already been proven that it works. And so that's really all you need to know. What's the other one?
So the other main thing we're looking at, which we haven't seen just yet be incredibly relevant, although it did top once, and we saw it a little bit last format as well, which is our Viral Infection skill.
That's right. Yeah, so Viral Infection is, during your turn, you can discard a number of cards, and that's where this comes in, where, yes, that skill is only once per turn, but being able to use that kind of a skill for free because you keep recycling your Night Assailants every single turn is, as long as you can stall out your opponent somehow, you're going to win by deck out sooner than you normally would, like in last format, because you don't have to worry about drawing a card to discard it. You already have discard fodder guaranteed.
Right, and something to point out too is that as good as it sounds that, wow, every turn I get to make my opponent send a card from their deck to the graveyard, as good as that is, it might even be better because there are scenarios where you can make your opponent send 2 cards from their deck to the graveyard every turn. There's the edge case where you can even make them send 3 every turn, because if you discard 2 Night Assailants at the same time for the same Viral Infection, they can target each other simultaneously, adding both back to your hand.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those cards that's only going to get better as we get more discard effects and costs. So you can understand by this point, even if you don't play Advance, which I don't. I don't think you do either right now.
Not in a long time, yeah.
Yeah, so you can understand why it's been limited in that format for a long, long time, because there's so many easy discards in Advanced, as we know, because even from back when we used to play, there were a lot. So this is just an incredibly broken loop, and Konami thought it was too broken for the original Master Advanced format, and Matt thought it wasn't too broken for us. So cool, let's see what it can do. Because of course. And with that, let's actually get into showing you the viral deck, because we do have a sample deck for you. Okay, so here's the replay of the deck, and set up Speed Duels really fast, put this top card back, shuffle it. Okay, so because, as I went a little bit too fast there, because you drew your Despair and your Haunted Shrine, your first instinct or my first instinct as a viral player, tell me if you agree, would be to go ahead and discard them both right away, especially if you see a skill like Inner Conflict, where they can summon Jinzo and just like make your shrine on the field completely worthless.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly against a deck like that, that is usually first thing we're looking at. You love seeing Despair and Haunted Shrine together, and that's just the easiest way to set it up.
Yeah, but on the other hand, so Spellproof, you might want to do that as well. But something you pointed out is that you don't have to, because Spellproof can't Jinzo turn 1 unless they Soul Exchange, and you don't have to give them a target for Soul Exchange.
Right, especially in a scenario like this, there is absolutely no reason why we have to put a monster on the field here. So that actually opens up another option for us, because against Spellproof, their turn 1 plays me either Colossus or Breaker, right? So we actually have a better option for that.
Well, for Spellproof, it's got to be Colossus, but they can't play Breaker, so...
You're right, so Colossus, yeah.
Yeah, but for even a Conflict deck, like, if you don't put a monster on the field for them to take, then their turn 1 play is probably going to be something like Breaker.
Right, exactly. So worst case, even if they try to Breaker, we're totally fine with that.
Yep.
And we're totally fine.
Yeah, because if they do, whether it's Breaker or them attacking with Colossus, that's when you pop your Shrine on the field, and you have a 3000 defense monster now blocking pretty much any first turn monster they could put out there. So that's a very good opening. And then draw for turn, you get Sphere Kribo, and now you can just do whatever the situation calls for. You can use Exiled Force to pop whatever you need to pop if there's something like that there. You can set your Night Assailant if you want to, although there's a strong argument to be made to hold that to get the loop going if you draw a second one. But at the same time, you could set this one, use it, let it go to the graveyard from the field, and still use the second one you draw to start your loop.
Right, and that's the beauty of it, is that you have so many options here, and especially because we were able to just set the Haunted Shrine turn 1, so even if something happens, like a Conflict, Tribute, well, we still get to bring it right back, because we still haven't used the Haunted Shrine in the grave yet. So, especially with Sphere in hand, we're really not afraid of anything our opponent can do next turn, so we have a lot of different ways we could play it.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's all we need to say about this sample. So let's go into the full deck. Alright, so here's the full deck. So you got the 3 Despair, 3 Zombina. Now I will point out that the deck that Justice mentioned that did top, it was played by Soon, and he was not running any Despair. So he was pretty much running a very similar deck to this. He had more Battle Traps and stuff, which we discussed with him, and a lot of people tend to agree that Battle Traps aren't great in a Breaker heavy meta that also has Cosmic Cyclones running around, as well as XYZ Dragon Cannon. There's a lot of counters to Battle Traps, so it's just not a great meta for Battle Traps. But other than that, he did not have Despair, but he agreed that maybe 1 is good, so you can see I just went all in on this. Now obviously, like all the other decks in this video series, it's not completely optimized, so just to point out some options here, that the ratio of Despairs isn't like set one way or another. Then you have your Zombina for your second Reborn target. I do still like running 1 Book of Life. I don't know what you think about that, but that's just the way the deck's always been played to me, so it's not something I necessarily want to change. Like, it's a good, like, on my main phase, I can bring something back. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's still reasonable, particularly with the Despairs. If you're running a version that's cutting Despair, you do drop the Book of Life. I don't think Zombina as your only target is worth it. But with the Despairs, I think it's fine. One thing it does have, which is neat, is, it doesn't, I'm not going to say counters, but it can hinder, like XYZ, if you're banishing their materials from the grave that they want to use with their skills, and they need to have Union Scramble to bring them back, or else, you're taking care of those, or at least delaying them. So that's a nice little benefit that it has. Or any deck that's relying on the graveyard in any way. And of course, Viral Infection takes care of the weakness of Book of Life, which is what if my opponent doesn't have a monster in their grave. Well, we can make sure that they do. So I would say if you're running the Despairs, particularly multiples, I think the Book of Life is still fine. However, if you're choosing to run a Despair Light version with either 1 or 0, then I'd probably cut it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And just another point to add on how good Book of Life can be against certain decks is that in the Relinquish loop, it pretty much breaks the loop on its own because you banish their Faceless or Relinquish whatever they would loop into next. And you've essentially broken the loop and you only have one monster to get rid of now to completely get rid of them. And speaking of getting rid of monsters, there are 5 cards that do exactly that. I've got 2 copies of Exiled Force here and 3 of the Night Assailant, which lets you really loop. So the Exiled Force is just something that I put in because it destroys any monster on the field, and it can be floated into by Giant Rat and Zombina, which also float into each other. So it's like a lot of floating into, then you want to end up with, like, I think you want to try to end up with an Exiled Force on the field in a lot of situations where you can then on your turn immediately destroy their monster. Because one thing that's really good about Exiled Force is the only monster on your field, and then use its effect and now it's no longer there, is that makes your Haunted Shrine live because it makes you have no monsters on the field. And it's the first time I think we've had the ability to manipulate to this extent when Haunted Shrine can go live. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because in the past we kind of had to figure out, all right, how do I, anticipate how many attacks my opponent's going to have, because I have to kind of rely on them to destroy my monster for me, usually by battle. So Exile Force is really nice in that it allows us to clear our field while still accomplishing something. And as you said, between the Giant Rats and the Zombinas, we actually have a fair amount of control when we end up with Exile as our last monster. So it actually works out really nicely for this deck.
Yeah, that's why you only need 2 copies of it. There's no need to run 3. There's no need to run Rhoda to search it, because you are essentially searching it as long as you have a Giant Rat. And another thing, speaking of, opening Zombina was usually terrible, right? If you got nothing to target for it, with it. But with Foolish Burial, as long as you get Zombina with Foolish Burial, that can still work out really well, because you can Foolish Burial your Giant Rat, and then you can actually set Zombina turn 1, and that's just not a bad play. In fact, it's a good play, because then your Zombina turns into a rat, which then can float into either a Zombina or an Exiled Force, whatever you need, or even another rat. That's why the second rat's there, right? So, thanks for suggesting that. And then obviously, in any deck that you run floaters, like we've already seen, how well it works with Apprentice, you should consider running Creature Swap, and it's just a one-of tech in here, I do believe, because you don't have that much like great things to give your opponent as much as an Apprentice Magician deck would, because Apprentice is just like, it's completely terrible. Like here, they're at least going to have a 1400 body if you're giving them one of your floaters. If you do manage to use a Night Assailant, it is slightly better, but then it doesn't float if you kill your own Night Assailant. So this was actually I was actually on 3 of this, and then it was actually like you helped me realize to cut this down to 1.
Yeah, it's an amazing card in any deck that can really use it. And this was something that we had kind of discussed, before, which that if your deck has the ability to make use of Creature Swap, you should probably be using it. But as you say, like, our targets are limited, and they are less of a like kind of blowout when you do swap them compared to something like an Apprentice Magician. So I do think it's worth having as an option, but you usually don't want to be seeing a second or third copy of it. So yeah, I think the 1-up as a tech is pretty good, especially in a deck that can thin itself, through something like the Giant Rat and the Foolish Burial. Even the card that we're going to get to soon, which is Magical Hats, which also thins the deck. So you don't need a bunch of them. I think the 1-up is pretty good here.
Yeah, Magical Hats, like you said, it's a card we're going to get to. So this, I know it's a battle trap, and I know I just said, a few minutes ago that battle traps aren't really good in the meta right now, but that doesn't mean you can't have one when it's something so useful like Magical Hats is in this deck. Now, going back to the deck that topped, Soon was also running Wild Tornado. Now, I think that is a complete brick, so I decided to not run that, but I mean, I understand the argument for running it because, breakers around and stuff. But for me, it's laser focused on just 1 Magical Hats, and if you do draw it, you use it to get your Haunted Shrines into the graveyard as soon as possible. That's it. There's no other purpose to it. You don't want to run too many, because then your opponent can potentially get a free +1 off of their just normal summoning their breaker. and that puts you at a huge disadvantage because you were relying on it to stop an attack and put your Haunted Shrines in your graveyard to get that set up, and you've accomplished nothing, and your opponent has popped one of your cards for absolutely free. So there's no worse feeling than that, in my opinion, which is why it's just a 1. And if after testing, if you find it's not working out, and if the meta is really, really back row hate heavy, even more than like we think right now, then this would be the first card to cut if you need to make any changes to the deck, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Obviously, we're on the same page that, battle traps are just generally not good in this format. With that said, if you do get to resolve magical hats in this deck, it is just fantastic. We didn't have a way of searching out Haunted Shrines before. In fact, I remember in the last tournament I played in, I missed top 8 because in like a game 3 of a match that I needed to win, like my 3 Haunted Shrines were in like the bottom 5 cards in my deck, so like it felt super bad. So like now we actually have a potential way of getting them from the deck to the grave immediately without having to draw them. So, and as you said, it can block attacks as well. So if you ever resolve it in this deck, it is amazing. But if you're running more than one, the more you run, the more risk you run of drawing one late game, and you really don't want to be doing that after you've already drawn your shrines. Magical Hats just becomes kind of dead. So I agree, 1 is probably enough. It might even be too much. It might not be worth running at all. With that said, there's no guarantee that your opponent has a breaker at the time you have Magical Hat set, so I do think trying 1 is fine, but I do agree if you're looking to cut something, it's probably the first card to go.
Yep. Okay, and then really quick, some options for potentially a side deck or potentially just a different way to play the deck is you could run a 3rd Exile Force if you think that you really, really need an additional way to destroy monsters and 2 just isn't enough for some reason. There's the old Mask of Darkness, Jar of Avarice loop. There's Mind Crush, just because it's such a good side deck card in general. And not only that, it's with Viral, I think it's specifically for those like niche situations where, say, your opponent's deck because the meta has settled at some point, and you're calling, spells. Say you know exactly what spells they're going to run, and you're calling spell with Viral and they say no target. Now that means if you know their deck, you know what spells are in their hand, right? Now that allows you to make use of Mind Crush. So yes, that is kind of situational, but at the same time, it does guarantee you get rid of whatever card you were targeting with Viral if you have the Mind Crush as well. And then finally, just a Book of Moon in here, just because it can potentially protect your Despair if they do something to it. So if they try to Offerings it, if they try to Lost Wind it, if they even try to Parasite it now, Book of Moon is something that can protect it. And Vampire Lord is just an alternate zombie if you feel like your opponent is doing a lot of effect destruction and won't be able to get over a 2,000 body otherwise. I don't know. Like, we don't know the meta, so that's why it's just kind of it's a maybe. Is there anything else you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, something like that definitely could be a meta call. Again, this is the kind of deck that is very, very meta dependent as far as what you're looking to main deck or side deck. So I think it's hard to say for sure what all our options are immediately. And it's something that we're just gonna have to look at more as the meta settles, because this kind of deck is usually better positioned as like an anti-meta rather than just this is generally good all the time, right? So I think we'll kind of have to wait and see, what we need to counter with it.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, and one weakness for the deck, I don't know if I've already said this, but is Kaiku. And that's the reason that I went ahead and that's another reason I went ahead and went with the Exiled Force instead of something else as a Zombina target, because it's a controllable destruction of your weakness, which is Kaiku. And again, just for in terms of like the way you're going to play against that weakness is don't discard your Haunted Shrine once you know your opponent's on Kaiku. Go ahead and set it and get the field value out of it, because Kaiku can't do anything to stop that. And I will say during testing, watch out, don't recklessly attack Kaiku with your Despair to try to get rid of it, because what happened to me was I got hit with a lot of like battle stuff. Like I got hit with Shrink, I got hit with Widespread Ruin, So if that's like anywhere relevant in the meta, I would say do not be reckless with how you attack with Despair, because remember, don't be me, don't be dumb. Remember that the deck's win condition, primary win condition, is deck out. You only attack if you see like an absolutely like opening that you cannot turn down. That's the only reason you would really want to go in and attack. Or if for some reason you think the deck out isn't going to work, I don't know a scenario where that could happen. But if that is what's happening, then it's either a desperate situation or like your opponent is absolutely wide open. Is the only situations I think you would attack. It's a very patient deck. I would still keep backup plans in case they have an out tier Despair. So always keep a backup plan. Don't attack unless you absolutely see like an undeniable opportunity, and win by deck out. I think that's the summary of the deck. Sums it up pretty well.
That's absolutely it, yeah.
All right. So with that said, let's actually move on to discuss just some decks we not necessarily want to show off, but just discuss, starting with Tribal Synergy. Hey guys, gonna have to cut this episode short here because we talked a lot more about the two decks that have been in the video than I wanted to, and because of that, I didn't want to make the video over an hour long, so I'm going to just split it into 2 parts. So part 6 will pretty much cover everything that I haven't covered yet in the first 5 parts, starting with, of course, Tribal Synergy, as I talked about. So I will see you for part 6. Terra Master out.